what I want to see, a DJI camera. A lot of people like the image from the Ronin 4D. The next logical step would simply be take that image sensor that you have and put it into a real camera. Let's say there's a mirrorless camera from DJI. Is that something that's attractive for them, attractive enough for them because it's such a crowded market?
What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD newsroom with Nino Leitner and Johnny Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly Cinetech podcast.
Hello, everybody, to CineD Focus Check episode 48. How are you doing, Johnny?
I'm very well, thank you. Nino, how are you?
Good.
Are you sleeping well at night, or two kids?
I know, I have a baby, so it's always hopping between beds, just to get your kid to sleep again. Anyway,
I can laugh at it. Yeah,
you can laugh at it. You're so big. Today we decided to do a little bit of a different episode. We actually want to do our predictions for camera and filmmaking gear for 25.
The future.
I guess we're a little bit late with this, but January is already kind of at the end.
I don't think we are late. I think it's always fun to talk about what might come.
And the good thing is we can talk about it now because, very often, as you guys know or might know, we're under NDA with camera manufacturers. And I think now it's early enough that we don't know so much.
It's like
yet.
when we know, we can't talk about it.
Exactly.
When we don't know what is coming,
we can speculate.
Yeah?
So now nobody can, right now we're almost free. So it's a good time to talk about it. Let's start with cameras, then move on maybe to lenses, and then whatever else we think might affect the industry or change, and maybe also about different categories. But let's start with cameras.
Can I summarize it all? New cameras are coming during 2025.
Great. That was it. Thanks for watching. See you next. Yeah, that's.
You don't have to be you can be a smartass like what I did now, but obviously new things will always come.
But of all the camera manufacturers that we have, where do we think, there's always some just released some stuff like, Canon just released a lot of new cameras in 24. Which other camera manufacturers do we have where we are actually expecting?
Okay.
Which let me phrase differently. Which cameras are due for replacement actually? Okay.
So first of all, let's get serious. No more new cameras are coming for sure. But before even starting this discussion, I think this is our prediction, yeah. But it's very important to note that whatever comes next doesn't make your existing equipment obsolete.
Of course, you have to throw it away and immediately only use the new stuff.
Not, yeah. So for the sake of our Earth and for the sake of your, don't throw the money easily. I'm sure that the equipment that you have now is more than capable to fulfill your needs and tell you the stories you want to tell. But let's go actually company by company. Let's start with Panasonic.
Okay.
We know for sure, and that's not a secret, that besides the S9, which was the latest full-frame camera from Panasonic, everything else in the L-mount full-frame, all the cameras that they have are simply aging. And I'll be very surprised if we will not see anything new this year. Now,
really?
Yeah. Panasonic was always a company that really were catering the filming industry and the creators in a very, very direct and a very thoughtful way. Yeah, from open gate to high frame rate to the cooling system to make sure that the cameras are not overheating and so on. They have very nice cameras. The only thing is that some of those cameras are really aging. So I'm actually very, very confident, and this is not based on any knowledge, is just a common sense thing, that it has been too long since we've seen anything from Panasonic. And funny enough, we do get a lot of questions from people who still remember the Varicam series of cameras. And for those who are not aware of the Varicam, Panasonic used to have a professional line of cinema cameras, and somehow this line has simply vanished. I don't think that this line will be revived in any time soon. There's actually no real reason. And if it will, it probably will be in a completely different shape, like much smaller, much more affordable, and so on. Anything from your end about Panasonic?
You also don't forget the EVA 1 which
gone, finished, too late.
Exactly.
It came to the market much too late. I mean, that was supposed to be Panasonic's answer to a very successful FS5, if I'm not mistaken, from Sony.
or FS7, yeah.
Or FS7, but it came to the market much too late. And as much as people like the camera, obviously, it's one thing to like a camera, it's another thing to buy it.
Well, but then they had the EVA 1, we had the Varicam and the Varicam LT. The Varicam very much targeted at high end, trying to compete with Alexa. We talked about that in another episode, how difficult that is in general to, get the high end to actually replace what's working, because I mean, why would they?
Of course.
And that's why it's interesting to see what Blackmagic is trying to do with the Ursa Cine 12K and 17K.
Which was, by the way, the 12K was just approved by Netflix.
Yeah,
which is also very this is a small big thing, meaning that should kind of give the certificate for producers and
well, the thing with that is always that like almost all the new cameras are accepted by Netflix. It's a bit of a marketing thing.
I'm not so sure with all, but it doesn't matter. But what I want to say is
even much lower end
it's a tool, and as you said, it's a very brave move from Blackmagic Design to give
to target the high end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's go back to...
Because Panasonic decided to get out of this market. They even decided to get out of the pro video market for any like camcorder shaped interchangeable lens cameras like the EVA 1. And there's probably never going to be an EVA 2, even though, and I think we should point that out, a lot of people love that camera.
Yeah, but again, love of a
I'm just saying, it's like it was a popular camera, but it was too late. It was too little too late. And we just hope that this is not going to be the case for other cameras from their line, because we haven't seen a replacement. I just looked it up for the S1H, was announced almost 5 years ago, over 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I think it's almost 5 years ago now. So that's a very long time. And
it's very long time. And when you look at like camera sales report from Japan, you see that Panasonic is simply not there. And that's also an indication that if you don't come up with something kind of newish, customers tend to forget you and they move on. Yeah.
But I think one of the problems is that when the whole DSLR craziness started 15 years ago, or now it's 17 years ago, I would say, but really got into gear around 2010, 11, 12, when then also we had the first professional cameras with larger sensors that were targeted at filmmaking. We saw that people started out with Canon because they were the first. So we had a lot of people investing into Canon glass and EF lenses. And then it was Sony kind of like playing catch up. And suddenly, I think the first one they announced, which was proper in terms of mirrorless, was the A7S, the first one.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about DSLR, don't forget that they inherited some stuff from Minolta. A7S was really the first one to really be kind of catering us.
But that's what and then you had so many people, including us and many others, that were adapting Canon glass to those cameras because you could easily do it with the E-mount, with a short flange mount, which was, I think, was the first short flange mount that was the market, right? For that was before the L mount, long before the RF mount, even before the ZF mount, I think. So we had only the E mount kind of, which was capable of adapting all kinds of DSLR lenses. So everybody shifted to that. People started buying Sony lenses at some point because and that kind of managed. I mean, Sony managed by this kind of. People got married with their system, right? Because you can go one way, but you can't go back because you can't use your E-mount lenses on other cameras. And I think that was part of the problem for Panasonic, which really started extremely late with large format, like large sensor cameras in the market. And by that time, a lot of people were already invested into other glass that kind of, mostly Sony, that kind of married them to Sony. I mean, Canon in a different way has a similar problem, I think, with the RF lenses, where now they have arguably the most modern cameras out of those, especially in the cinema line of their cameras. But the problem being that, like if you're a Sony shooter with E-mount glass in your vault, it's not easy to change. Even if you want to, you would have to sell everything because you can't adapt them.
Let's just conclude about Panasonic because you mentioned, so first of all, just to be clear, Panasonic was one of the first companies to introduce a mirrorless camera. Yeah, and the GH1.
Oh, yeah.
Which was,
but I mean, full frame.
Yeah, it was a micro four thirds, but that was one of the first ones. And don't forget, in standard, like in whatever standard you look at, micro four thirds is still a bigger it's a not big as APS-C, and of course not a full frame, but still it's a bigger sensor than, let's say, a broadcast 2/3 inch like industry standard for broadcast. But anyway. That's what I think that Panasonic will have to come up with a new line. The question when they will do this, if it's going to be, I mean, we are just before CP+, if they will already introduce something in February, end of February, or if that's more orientated like towards filmmaker, if it's going to be NAB or even CineD, because last year at CineD, they actually announced the GH7, which is a great camera. Yeah, and but it's a micro four thirds, and not everybody like that sensor size.
We're talking about predictions here. We didn't actually say specific predictions for Panasonic. So what's your prediction for Panasonic specifically?
You mean in terms of specifications?
Like what camera do you expect from them? Like what specs it will have?
Well, that's a bit harder. I mean, the thing is, they already have so many features implemented for filmmakers. So I guess what we might see is more of the, like a newer sensor. And that sensor, I mean, the sensor technology has to be new or newer in order to bring the people back on board. Otherwise the older cameras are really good. And also allow implementations of the ARRI log C3 into a full frame camera, because what we have right now is only for the GH7 and also GH6. This is a paid upgrade, but I predict that this cooperation also will be, I hope it will be on the full frame too.
Do you think that Panasonic might consider getting out of this market altogether? I'm just asking because they are one of the smaller ones in terms of like supplied units. And we have seen, if we look at stats, how much the camera market in general has shrunk over the last 15 years. It's incredible, actually. I think we saw the stats. It's 120 million units sold down to 9 million. Now, of course, most of those...
This is in general.
That's the overall. Yeah. Now, of course, most of those were probably, like inexpensive point-and-shoot cameras, which has died away because of the smartphone. But it still also affected, of course, the mid-range. And like we said many times before, cameras are now so good that it's almost like, even for professionals, it's not as crucial to replace your camera anymore as it used to be.
Yeah. I don't want to start here a ball of rumors or anything because we simply don't know. Yeah, and I just think it will be a great loss for the industry if Panasonic will decide also to quit that market. I don't see this happening now. Of course, all of those big businesses are driven by income, which means if you don't make money, you are doomed. I really hope that the team at Panasonic, and knowing many of the people in this team in Japan and worldwide, they're really great and they have really great ideas. I really hope that they will just move forward with some of the ideas that they have. I mean, we can see that they invested quite a lot of time and money in improving their autofocus performance of the cameras. So now all modern cameras are with phase detection and not only contrast-based autofocus. I don't see this happening in 2025. I mean, I'm sure they will come with a new line of cameras, and then based on how those cameras will be accepted in the market, let's see then what 2026 will bring.
We'll be back after this message from our sponsor.
1 Minute Tips by FUJIFILM and CineD. Let's talk some handheld camera operating tips. Now, this one's going to be more subjective than the others. My experience differs greatly from the next person, but we can extract some general suggestions. Over time, you'll start to notice that the type of operating you are most comfortable with will start to define your style in a good way. So lean into that and configure your rig around what's most comfortable for you. In my case, I hardly ever use a shoulder rig. Even though most handheld setups are meant for that, I am just too tall. Many of my frames end up being above everybody else's eye line and make me have to squat, adding additional strain. So most times I operate from the hip or the chest in such a way that I can use a pivot point on my body to support the rig with a top or side handle. As a result, I tend to frame below the eye line with the camera looking up at the subject, which creates some interesting compositions. Start to bring attention to the way that you operate and focus on defining your style from your own comfort level instead of trying to assimilate to industry norms. 1 minute tips. Until next time.
And now back to the show.
Moving on to Sony, because you already talked about Sony. One of the things that I find it quite difficult with the company is sometimes that the changes that they make from model to model are much too small. Very much not environmentally friendly. You know what I mean? I mean, you're almost like, I think that every camera needs to have at least one feature, which is a deal breaker. But it will give a reason for people to buy it, either from within, let's say if you are a Sony lover, great, but if you are using other cameras, that it will make you think, do I want to upgrade? Otherwise, those small increments in development.
For example, which two cameras are too close to each other?
If you look at a lot of their cameras are much too close. Yeah, it's not. I think only the A9, because of the global shutter, for example, that's a big thing. Yeah, but even between the A1, the original A1 and the A1 II, there is a change. But the question is that enough to replace your camera? Saying that, some of their FX line cameras already slowly but surely are aging. I'm not so sure if we're going to see any replacement soon enough, because they're still very popular cameras. We know that the FX3 is selling very well.
Well, except for the FX9, which is not, like the FX9 is really due for replacement if they decide to keep that market, because, I mean, it would be a weird gap not to have a replacement for the FX9, because we have the FX6 and then we have now the...
Which is very popular, yeah.
Extremely popular, but the FX9 is not, because the FX6 is better in many ways. Yeah. Not in all ways, but in many ways. But we have the Burano, and if they don't replace the FX9, it's almost like they're giving up on this mid-tier, which is, it's becoming a more difficult bracket, this $12,000 area. But I think I don't know what the FX6 is now. I think it's like 6,000, 7,000, something like that.
It's easy to check.
But it would be a huge gap. I'm saying, like, also in terms of expectations from broadcasters, I think there's still advantages to having a camera a little bit larger. Maybe, like even if they brought out I use the FX9 always with it's $6,000, the FX6. Yeah. And of course we saw a lot of people, I think that really ended up being the replacement for the FS7, even though Sony probably didn't want that, but that's what happened because it was almost too capable for what it does. It's relatively small. It's very hard to build up, I think, to be nice on the shoulder, which is the problem I have with it. But other than that, it's a great camera. The FX9 is a little underspec'd in comparison, and the only thing that it's really going for it in comparison to the FX6 is that APS-C crop, like super 35mm crop in 4K, which is not possible with the FX6 because of the resolution. But, is that enough? That's probably not enough. So what, that is the oldest camera, the FX9, out of the FX line now. And I think it's now 6 years or something. Yeah,
but let's make a split between the mirrorless cameras and the kind of cinema line. Yeah,
let's start with the FX because we're already talking about them.
Yeah, I think when I can see a room for improvement will be, of course, implementing the global shutter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sensor into this professional line, whatever camera it is. And the other thing is vice versa, to bring some END, like electronic ND filter to the mirrorless side. So they have room to grow. And I just want to see more, for example, small things like a recording to external USB-C SSD, for example.
Actually, we're talking about predictions. I mean, this should be a predictions episode. So let's make predictions. My prediction is also that we will see a Sony Alpha line camera, or at least a mirrorless. It can be branded FX, doesn't matter, but something that is in the shape either of an FX3 or an Alpha line camera with a built-in variable ND. And I expect that because we have seen with the Burano being the first camera ever that has both a IBIS, like a stabilized sensor, combined with a built-in ND.
Which was always the reason for when we ask manufacturers, they always told us it's not possible.
That's what specifically Sony told us many times. And now they have been able to kind of do that. And it's still going to need more space, like because you probably have to make the body higher in order to have space to move that filter in and out, because there is always one physical filter that needs to move in still, even though when it's enabled, it is electronically changeable.
Yeah.
But so that is, that is my prediction for this year from Sony, that we will see one of those lower end camera have that. And hopefully, of course, that we will see a replacement for the FX9 for sure, that unless they skip it. And if they skip it, there will be a new FX6. But any of those new versions will also have that feature, meaning, of course, the electronic variable ND we had before, but it has to have that stabilized sensor, which it was missing.
I'm curious to see what will come after the Burano, because whatever comes after the Burano will have to be much cheaper in order to appeal to more people. Simply the competition is much stronger right now. And I really wonder what features they will allow. And then again, I mean, the whole Sony line, it's amazing to see how we get much more now for the price anyway. But again, we are not...
I think one big differentiator, if they come up with an FX9 Mark II and an FX6 Mark II at some point, the biggest differentiator that would make sense for me would be internal RAW recording. Like if they come out with an FX6 that is maybe 6K now, that would be enough for a lot of people to upgrade, and a stabilized sensor. That could be FX6 Mark II and an FX9 Mark II, same stuff, same resolution, but you can record XOCN light internally like you can do with a Burano. The question is, where does that leave the Burano? Because, of course, that is still a $25,000 camera that is probably not selling as much as they wanted it to sell.
What I would like to see, and again, we know there's FX3 and FX30. FX3 is extremely popular. FX30 is an APS-C sensor or Super 35, and it's much less popular. I mean, it's a great camera, but because of whatever reason, people prefer to take the full frame. What I would love to see, and again, this is maybe a prediction, if Sony decides to equip the whenever it comes, FX30 with electronic ND filter, for example, that might make people consider that camera even more.
Or they simply bring out an FX3 with the 6K sensor or a 6K sensor that, for example, they use on the FX9.
That you can crop.
Which you can simply crop Super 35 in 4K.
But that's not Sony. Possible. That's what I mean. Sony will really... I can't see them bringing one camera to cater both markets somehow. Yeah, I mean, look what they do with the A7S3 and the FX30, for example, or other cameras that are literally identical in many ways, just packed a bit different.
I have a hope, which is probably not a prediction because I don't really have any reason to believe that it will happen this year. But my hope is that, and I think I've talked about this several times before, that one of those Japanese traditional camera manufacturers will open up their platform in order to allow development on their camera hardware for other developers. Meaning, for example, to have the ability for, very talented software developers to kind of install apps on a camera that enhance the functionality of an app, working with the hardware that you have. Because imagine
Who's doing it, by the way? Like any other manufacturer?
We've seen experiments. We've seen experiments in this field with, you remember the Zeiss camera, and also the Samsung camera, both of which were discontinued. No, but you're shrugging it off. But it's basically those were Android-based cameras. But I'm just saying, I would love to see it, because I think that could be something that saves a camera company. Because if you're able, they obviously, none of the Japanese manufacturers have the software proficiency they would need in order to have image processing on the camera. Otherwise, they would have done it properly before. None of them have done it. If you compare, like, for example, Adobe photo editing on a camera or video. And I'm not talking about doing, like detailed adjustments. I'm talking about stuff like, for example, we have depth maps on phones, right? The phone knows exactly how far something is from the phone away. And by that, for example, on the iPhone, you can get stuff like the portrait mode or cinematic mode on the phone, meaning this fake shallow depth of field, which still has problems. Now imagine combining that with an actual, let me finish, with an actual shallow depth of field, and then having the ability to just say, well, I want a little bit more, maybe 1 or 2 stops more. Not the extreme part you have on the phones, but something small enough that it will be impossible to discern on the finished product, or both video and photo, if it was digitally enhanced or not. So you can actually, for example, you would end up shooting, let's say, at an f4 with a lens, and then in camera you could decide, well, actually, I want to change it to a fake f.8 to f2.8, for example. So add 1 or 2 stops, or you can only go in one direction, of course, but not too extreme, because then you get these weird effects. But these would be things that make a lot of sense. Also, of course, basic editing functionality. We see last episode we talked about vertical shooting. So many people. We have now finally, since COVID, we have this connectivity of the cameras to the phones, but it's not nearly not nearly far enough, in my opinion. You need to have this complete integration with a cloud service if you wanted to, and even the ability to actually not use your phone to post on one of those platforms would be very useful for the lower end, and also I think for some of the higher end, to be honest. I mean, so many people, so many of our audience are probably shooting for social media content for various companies. And if it's a fast turnaround, it literally still needs to move from A to B. Why not being able to do, post directly to Instagram from your camera? Why is this something we still need to talk about in 2025? Why is this not built in?
Okay, so first thing first, all the companies that we are talking about, especially all the Japanese companies, they have another division which is making lenses. I don't see, and it's a big business, I don't see any of them sacrificing that business just in order to create whatever depth of field within camera in a digital way, let's call it, or software way. I don't see this happening. Editing from within the camera, maybe, but I don't think that any of those cameras are really, even if they say this is for content creators, none of these cameras are really, and I have to compare it to the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, for example, that this camera do allow editing, because,
but it's DJI, and DJI knows how to do software.
We will talk about DJI in a second, and this is legit, and I think it's also legit to have another line of cameras which is dedicated really for content creators or whoever think it's important to deliver fast, But with the current lines, I don't see any reason to, for example, if you have a new Panasonic full frame camera targeted to professionals, also to include this kind of editing software on the camera. I don't see the need for it, but maybe I'm wrong. But let's move on. It's important, and it's very...
well, I think it's of course it's going to be cannibalizing. It can be theoretically cannibalize some of their own lens business, but you know how it is. If you don't cannibalize yourself, somebody else will do it. And we know that those companies, in Silicon Valley don't sleep.
Sure, but that's a completely different question, very legit. Where are we heading to lenses? And we will talk about prediction about lenses in a second, and how much it's still important to create fast lenses when you create some of the look with in a different way, which is probably much cheaper when using glass. But let's continue with companies. What is your prediction about Canon this year?
Canon has actually just had a flurry of releases.
During 2024.
Canon just had a flurry of releases during 2024. So we saw the C400, we saw the C80, we saw the R5 Mark II. What else am I missing?
And one of our country, was it R1 this year too? The flagship, if I'm not mistaken.
R3, also not so old. So it's like, I don't think that they will They probably release something by the end of the year, but I don't think we will see much in the first half of the year because they're kind of set well, especially in the cinema line. The question is for me, what will happen eventually with C500 Mark II, because this is kind of close to the C400. Will it be replaced or not? This might phase out, or we have seen in our lab test, our recent lab test that we talked about last week, that the results of the C400 in the lab are good, but it's kind of a mixed bag because they're not using the newest sensor. So it seems like, there is some room for enhancements for a higher end model here. Probably never we will see a C700 again, because it's the same topic as we have seen with the Varicam. They were targeting the high end. I don't think this camera, I'm seeing this camera nowhere really. I mean, the only high-end cameras we see on high-end sets are Alexa, like RE cameras, RED cameras, and to a smaller degree Sony, but Sony is doing quite well, I think, with the Venice. But we don't see Canon cameras, we don't see Panasonic cameras, and so far we also don't see the Blackmagic cameras because they're so new. Yeah. But in general, I don't see a replacement for the C700. Other than that, yeah, we might see new versions of some of their R cameras because, of course, that's a much bigger business for them. And during this year, but I'm not too deep into Canon, to be honest, to make proper.
My gut feeling will say, hey, Canon, just continue this stream of cameras, releasing cameras like you did in 2024, because those are very good cameras. But on the other hand, we know it's not that you flip a coin and suddenly there's a new camera. Actually, the design of those cameras probably started 2, 3, 4 years ago. So we saw the outcome in 2024. So it's really a matter of when and if they continue development after the EOS C80 and the EOS C400 in the same pace. And then it means that we might see more cameras. I hope so, and if not, I hope that the higher management saw how those cameras are being received in the market, and I think there's a reason for them to continue and push the envelope. One thing that nobody can take from them, actually two things. First is the color science, but we really love these warm colors, and the other thing is they make their own sensors, unlike other companies in our industry which are relying on different versions of a Sony sensor. They are making their own sensor, and that's they have to sell a lot in order to keep developing, because that's an expensive thing.
Which is also why we see the same sensor employed in various cameras, of course. Yeah, but it's the same for Sony sensors as well.
Yeah, I mean, the sensor division of Sony is a separate unit, and also Sony is contracting the sensors from this division. Yeah, but there are off-the-shelf sensors, and I don't want to go into specific names and cameras that we know in order to cut the cost of development just went with off-the-shelf sensor. We know it happened, and the results are just okay. Or sensors that were acquired by a company from Sony, but then went through implementation of what they want in the sensor in order to be able to give more, in terms of color and other stuff.
And put a different emphasis on various things, what they want there.
No, so this is Canon. I mean, not too much to talk about in this regards, because as we said, new cameras came during 2024. Let's see what 2025 will bring. Fujifilm, what do you think Fujifilm will show?
Well, you're the Fujifilm expert here, but I mean, of course, we know the GFX Eterna will come because they already announced it. People are really waiting for specs. People are worried that the rolling shutter performance will be like with a GFX 100.
It won't.
Exactly, they said that, but still, because it's essentially the same hardware. So that is gonna see when you go to Japan for CP Plus, if there will be an update. We will hopefully already see more specifications and maybe, I don't know, early prototype we'll see. We don't know. But that be very curious. And of course, I think in general, it's just, I am always amazed, like they are kind of the underdog amongst the Japanese manufacturers. And I think they make very wise decisions with regards to what market they focus on. And I still think it's very smart not to go into the full frame market, but really go APS-C and separately onto the large format, which is definitely something where people are very interested in seeing more options, because what do we have in the large format market? I mean, of course, we have the high end REs, we have the V Raptor, the big one, and then what else? I mean, there's not so much now. The Blackmagic with a 17K sensor, and
we have the Hasselblad, which is more
photo.
like photo oriented, unless DJI will decide to do something with, because Hasselblad is owned by DJI.
Yeah,
but we'll talk about DJI in a second. Fujifilm had a very fruitful year with 4 new cameras. Some of the cameras, like the XH line, might see some adoption or some development. One ace that Fujifilm has under its sleeve is this 14-bit sensor readout. I think that's one of the only companies which is doing it in mirrorless cameras for video. And I hope, or I can predict, that can be another selling point if they decide to move forward with future generations of some of their mirrorless cameras. So what else can Fujifilm do, actually?
well, the question is, and that's, the next company we need to talk about is Nikon and RED, because they're, of course, together. The question is, will other camera manufacturers finally be able, maybe, to record RAW internally? Maybe this is something that will be licensed out or not. We don't know. But of course, that just having 14-bit from a Fuji in RAW, that would be amazing internally. But I don't see this happening. I think this is probably something that Nikon will keep, this patent, and milk it as long as they can for themselves. We'll see.
I don't know. Let's see. But so we will see, of course, some new mirrorless cameras from Fujifilm. And I'm actually excited about the GFX Eterna line, because that's not a single camera. It was very clear when talking to Yuji-san and Makoto-san from Fujifilm that this is just the first in a line of cameras. So although the first one will come during this year, when you develop something, you don't put all the efforts and resources into one thing, but I guess there's already somewhere, there's a line of cameras, maybe in different price brackets. So I'm very curious to see what will be, and if the line will evolve during 2025, or it's going to be every time one camera per year.
Well, we know for sure they're very serious about video, just by announcing a GFX Eterna as a pro video camera. And I think it's the first company in a very long time that is kind of entering a pro video market, right? I mean, we've most other, not all of them, like Hasselblad and like Phase 1 or whatever, don't actually have, or professional video cameras, and Leica has some pro video features, but not a dedicated line of pro video cameras. And I think this is the first time in a long time. So I hope that this is also, showing some innovation in that field, because of course that is a great opportunity for Fujifilm to put in some features that we haven't even thought about from other manufacturers for professional video functionality. And yeah, very, very curious. Yeah, what's coming.
Yeah. So talking about large format, let's discuss quickly about DJI, because we know that DJI.
Well, let's finish with the Japanese manufacturers first, and maybe do Nikon and RED.
Okay.
So yeah, of course. I mean, one of the first episodes we recorded of this podcast was when it was announced that RED was sold to Nikon. That was in March, I think, last year. So almost a year ago. My prediction is that we will see something new from them around NAB time. It might only be an announcement, because of course we know that they have to work on integrating the two companies.
But
they have to
be Nikon with RED features or RED with Nikon features.
It's very difficult to say. I mean, on one hand, of course, Nikon said that it will keep the RED brand, just like to keep the existing RED customers happy, and of course it makes sense to, in this high-end market, to keep it. On the other hand, I'm not so sure, to be honest, because it's complete speculation. But we have seen on trade shows that actually they've like all the RED people were suddenly wearing shirts that said Nikon the what is it called, the motion control company that they own, Mark Roberts? No,
Yeah,
what
something
is it
with
like?
robots. Something with Mark. Something with Mark Roberts. No.
Sorry, not very familiar with that. But and then the third brand was Red on that, and it's almost like, like on one hand they said they're gonna keep the brand, they might, but you could already see in terms of priority, in a way, it seemed to me that it's very much going under the Nikon thing. So
Maybe just a t-shirt design. You never know, Nino.
yeah, but even the booths, even the booths looked like yellow Nikon thing, which it's difficult. I think they will keep the brand. I think they will also release new cameras under the Red brand. But I think they will, of course, change quite a few things. I think we will see. I mean, the one thing that Red has really going for it and always had is this RAW codec and the flexibility of it, and with the different compression ratios, which is very powerful. And I think we talked about it in the last episode, that actually you can debayer stuff that you shot on a Red 1 15 years ago with a modern version of Red RAW and actually get better results, which is amazing. And of course, they're going to capitalize on that. So I think we're going to see... This year, we're definitely going to see Nikon cameras with internal RAW recording with Red RAW codec. So even on, even if it's a Nikon branded camera in the Z line, we will probably see internal Red RAW recording on that, which would be great for
But what will be then the incentive for people to buy Red cameras?
Well, there's still going to be. Well, that's essentially going to be the differentiate. That's what like what Canon and Sony and are doing with their cinema lines and their mirrorless lines. I'm thinking that Nikon will be the same, and they probably just going to have the Red cameras as their professional camera line, and the Nikon cameras as their kind of like hybrid line. And
I mean, that would be amazing. The thing is that if they do this and implement Red RAW recording in Nikon mirrorless cameras, that means that one of the only things that will still make the differentiation between the professional line will be the connectivity. Because obviously professional cameras like Red have simply more...
Well, they can also have larger sensors, like VistaVision and stuff like that, not just full frame. There's a lot of things they can do still under a Red banner, and I think they will probably be wise to further capitalize on the how widespread Red camera usage is in the high end.
Yeah.
They probably want to put out more high end, so they're probably gonna try to make something that is continuing to compete in that field. And I don't think any of that will be released this year, but they might announce something. So maybe they will just have a new sensor design with more sensitivity that is kind of taking what Nikon has and combining that with Red on the high end, and on the lower end they're probably going to have hybrid camera with Red RAW recording internally.
Well, those are all the big things. I'm one of the smaller but very important thing. I'm very curious to see what lens mount the future Red cameras will have, if they will continue with the RF mount or will simply move to Z mount, for example. Because when you talked about upsetting existing customers or not, that's another consideration. Because if you're a Red customer and you already started to build your own RF collections of lenses, and suddenly you move to Z mount, what does it mean? What do you do? Yeah, so
I think it's a tough decision also for Canon in a way, because of course they would essentially, Nikon is one of their main competitors, especially in the photo field, and I think to further allow RF mount usage on Red cameras.
Yeah, but I'm sure that was not for nothing, because in exchange, I guess that Canon was allowed to include RAW recording in their cameras.
That's our guess.
Yeah, our guess. I'm just saying. So
yeah. Maybe they continue that, but it would still be strange to have. They at least need to add the Z mount option, right? So maybe they come up with a system like Sony where you have a E mount and PL mount, and you kind of they're built on top of each other. And we also saw from Canon in the past with some of the older Canon cinema line models, you could actually take out the entire mount and replace it. So maybe they make something like this for the Red line, so that you have RF or Z mount and you can just swap it. That would make a lot of sense. And I think, of course, that would allow them to bundle the Red cameras also with their lenses, like their own Nikon lenses. Okay, so that's Nikon and Red. What else in Japan? We have Sigma.
Sigma, of course. Well, on one hand, Sigma has this really beautiful looking FP camera and then FPL. And somehow this line never evolved into something else. My prediction.
So we say Foveon sensor.
No. That will not happen in the near future, because the more I talk to people at Sigma, I understood that it's very complicated to keep to have so many frames per second without having the sensor exploding. Oh, I'm joking here, but really getting very hot, and that I don't think the technology for video is ready. But unfortunately, I don't see the FP line of cameras growing up. I'm not so sure that even Sigma will continue to develop this line. I think at the end of the day, maybe they still regard themselves as a company that cater photographers first. So it might be that we will see new cameras that are, again, targeting photographers mainly. But this is only my prediction.
Well, I think from a business standpoint, again, in the shrinking market, it's probably smart to focus on what you do best, which is lenses in Sigma's case, because they have a very, very good reputation.
Yes, but also here, because the market has changed so much with the fierce competition from the Chinese companies. That means that Sigma, of course, they can rely on their good name and service and made in Japan and everything, which is really, really great. But on the other hand, the company really needs to innovate even more in order to stay relevant, like any other company in our market. But I'm just saying, if you kind of don't emphasize your camera line, then of course, when you emphasize the lenses, you have to.
The question always is, of course, we don't know behind the scenes, but it's like, it's in their best interest to have very good relationships to all the camera manufacturers, because that would allow them to manufacture lenses for all the cameras, mounts, and having their own own camera line is probably just complicating things.
I don't think so. I don't think that any of the leading Japanese camera manufacturers will consider Sigma as a huge competitor if they make good cameras that shoot video. Yeah, I mean, the numbers don't add.
Yeah, but if you're not serious, I mean, like that's basically assuming that they are not that serious about that business. But why would they go into that business if they're not serious about it? I'm just saying. Sigma,
yeah, they already tried, and it was a good try, and the cameras were.
But you're saying the other manufacturers wouldn't take them as a threat, but like from a Sigma's perspective, is like, why would you even do it if you have no chance of winning in a way that just gaining any significant market share with their camera?
Winning is one thing, but being realistic is another thing. And I think Yamaki-san is a very realistic. The CEO and owner of Sigma is a very realistic person. And again, the FP line was a good try. Some of the things, for example, autofocus in this camera, whatever generation, was not that good, and that's another thing that many of the companies are now relying on. Single shooters, also for video, you need a good autofocus to put the camera on a gimbal and so on. Otherwise, things are getting more complicated. And a development of every feature like this needs a lot of money and personnel. So at the end of the day, you need to decide what is the priority. And I guess priority-wise, I'm not so sure that video in mirrorless cameras is the highest priority for Sigma right now. So this is about Sigma. Did we forget? We forgot one manufacturer, which is OM.
The former Olympus. Well, honestly, we don't know. I mean, they're owned by what private capital now? I'm not even sure, but it's not it's not we're up to date with their newest cameras. To be honest, I don't see them having any significance in the video market at all anymore. They tried many years ago. They really, before they were sold, were really trying to get hold of some of the video market. They had some features. I mean, they were very good with Micro Four Thirds cameras, especially the stabilization was amazing at the time. But now, in terms of their OM system cameras, they're not even on my radar anymore.
I have to say it's a bit of a black box for us, because for complete transparency, maybe with them we don't have close contact, but that's also mean because I don't really think that they're catering the filmmakers market.
I don't even know anybody who's using their cameras to shoot video with.
I have to say that in Japan, those cameras are still very popular, but it's not necessarily popular with the people that we are catering. I mean,
What always confused me that they're now called OM system cameras, but the cameras still say Olympus on the camera bodies.
Maybe it was the first generation on the transition. I have no clue how it's. I'm
no.
Not
so like we can't really make an prediction here because we just simply haven't touched any of those cameras in a long time. But it's also because there's no requests from anybody in the audience, and we don't know anybody who's using them for video still.
That's right. Just out of curiosity, because Florian is here with us. Florian, do we have in the databases anything about OEM systems or former Olympus?
We don't even have them in the databases.
So that means that
nobody ever asked.
Yeah.
But let's move on to another big manufacturer, which is, of course, DJI. Now, DJI, I think we can make a few predictions because they are very prolific when it comes to new releases. We've just seen the Flip drone. My predictions with drones. We will probably see a replacement for the Mavic line, like the high end of the foldable drones.
I'm so happy that you still can follow the names, but okay.
Yeah. And that's simply, we know there's been a lot of rumors. We don't know anything yet, but it seems like there might be a new version of the Mavic line, Mavic 4 probably. This is also, I wouldn't say due for replacement because the existing Mavic 3 CineD is still an amazing drone. It's my favorite drone to fly, and also in terms of image quality. What I would like to see in that drone, I mean, just as a reminder, the Mavic 3 Pro CineD, or just Pro without the internal SSD. The top line has 3 cameras, and it's basically I think it's 24 millimeter equivalent. It's 70 millimeter, and then it's something like 170. So we have this huge jump at the end. The problem with a long telephoto camera was even on the Mavic 2. Actually, the predecessor. I got really confused with the names too because they brought out a separate Mavic 3 which only had 2 cameras. It's like it's very hard to follow. And now we have the Air 3S and the Air 3 which also has 2 cameras. So it's a bit confusing. But still, the problem is that basically the long telephoto camera is not usable professionally because it doesn't have the log. And you can see that the image quality is subpar in comparison to the others. It's a slow lens. The first generation, even you had problems with the ND because the first generation of the ND they brought out had the same strength for all the 3 cameras. So you were in the air, you switched to the other camera, and suddenly bloop, you lost all the light. But they got that feedback, and now with the current one, it's actually equivalent. But still, it's. You don't have all the professional settings, and you can really only use this you will see the difference on this. So my hope is that they will replace that long telephoto camera with a better version. I don't know if it's possible because, of course, this needs a lot more light. That means they would have to probably have a better sensor for that, which I'm sure is not so easy to do when it's that small. So that's my hope. Other than that, I don't even know what to enhance on that drone, to be honest. I think in many ways, this is like the perfect drone. I would rather have them drop the 170 mil and maybe add, it's similar almost to an iPhone, like you have the similar focal length, like you have this super wide level, you have a wide angle. On the iPhone, you have a super wide angle, and then you have the telephoto. What's missing for the drone is an in-between focal length, maybe. So maybe go from 24 to 50 and then 70, which would also allow them to have a middle camera that is faster, which would be more useful. And it's very nice to have telephoto lenses on a drone because you can basically make those nice parallax movements, which are otherwise just known from, like helicopter shots and stuff like that. So that's definitely something I would like to see. So just get rid of that long telephoto and replace it with an in-between focal length. And that would be a good update for the Mavic 4. Other than that, in terms of drones, I don't think we will see an update to the Inspire line. We've just seen the Inspire 3 is not so old, and we saw that the Inspire 2 was in the market for a very long time. We'll probably see their usual replacement of the other drones, which happens almost every year. The low end is kind of well catered now with a Flip and the Neo. Maybe we'll see a Mini 5, even though I don't even know how that would differentiate itself from the other low-end drones. And we've also just seen the Air 3S. So maybe they will just focus on something else entirely, because the drones are kind of covered except for the Mavic 4. So I hope there will be a Pocket 4, which
Osmo
Pocket 4. The last one was released about a year ago, so maybe there's a new one coming. This is a very popular product.
I think it's more than a year ago, because it was 2023 when it was released.
Oh, maybe then it's 2 years. Then it was February 23. So yeah, that's definitely something that would make sense. What is you're a very big fan of it? What is something you want to see in a Pocket 4?
First of all, many people are actually wrote me after the review, what should they do? Should they buy the existing one or wait for the next one? Of course, the answer was like with any other camera, if you need the camera now, buy it now. And if you don't need it for anything specific, just wait. A newer version will come. The main thing, I hope to see some solution with a longer telephoto lens on that, whatever way they will achieve, and maybe also implement one of those features taking from iPhone, which is creating a shallow depth of field to help the 1-inch sensor to become even more, because right now you can create a certain amount of shallow depth of field if you interview people or take images of products which are, let's say, arm away from you. But if you want something a bit more significant, I think you need the help of AI or any other, any software-based solution to help with the depth of field. But
do you want to see additional cameras on that gimbal head, or just?
I don't know what. There's so many ways to implement something like this with a rotatable way to. Or like with mobile phones, whatever they choose, I somehow do trust that they will do a good job, because we know they have the capacity, they have the personnel, they have the money to do all of this, and they keep surprising us. And usually between generation of cameras, unlike some Japanese manufacturers that we talked before, they do have a big leap. Like here between the Osmo DJI Pocket 2 and 3, the bigger screen and the rotatable one was a big thing for many.
Well, they have the LiDAR, so maybe they combine the LiDAR technology which works really well and build that into that, because then they will have a depth map, and with that depth map they could easily do a fake shallow depth of field.
Well, it all depends what is the product specifications. If you want to keep it as small as it is right now,
maybe there's going to be a pro version at some point.
We will see.
We also talked about this before. There was a bigger Osmo, which we almost forgot about because it wasn't as popular many years ago. I think it's still somewhere hidden on their website. But so let's see. I think they are now realizing they kind of nailed it. At least we don't have the numbers, but our feeling is that a lot of people use this type of camera. So they're probably working hard on a new version and maybe have different versions for that.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think we've seen the Ronin 4D is now also 4 years old, and it took a while to gain some traction, but we are seeing it more and more on high-end sets, which is very interesting. It took a while. Now it's a very specialized camera. It does what it is supposed to do very well, but the funny thing is there's various innovations in that thing, apart from the ARM, which is the very good DJI transmission, which is, very low latency wireless transmission that is not Teradek, and it's also they broke it out as a separate product, and then also the LiDAR, which was also one of the first times they used this in this device. I think it was only in the RS series before. So what I want to see is a lighter version of the Ronin 4D, because it's quite heavy and it's almost impossible to kind of put on easy rig or something like that, because you will lose a lot of the flexibility. So a lighter version of that, and maybe also simply a DJI camera, because that's the logical next step. Is a lot of people like the image from the Ronin 4D. It's very easy to make look exactly like an Alexa. The image science that DJI is using for their D-Log, even if you apply a standard Alexa LUT for their log, it's very close. It's really, really close. So that's also one of the reasons I think why it's become so popular on high-end sets, for those specific car-to-car shots and wherever you want to have something that is also stabilizing that fourth axis. Now, the next logical step would simply be take that image sensor that you have and put it into a real camera. Like, make it does it. But is that something that DJI wants to make? That's the question, because of course that's a very crowded market. It's not like, if let's say there's a mirrorless camera from DJI, is that something that's attractive for them, attractive enough for them, because it's such a crowded market? I think so. They probably have the capacity, and they could immediately own a big chunk of the market because of the reputation of their products. The question is, of course, what mount would it be? What mount would they be able to use? Like you mentioned before, they own Hasselblad. So far, we have not seen any tight integration between the companies, which is interesting. We've seen, of course, Hasselblad, they say Hasselblad camera / lenses on Mavic drones. Although I don't know what that means, because, like, of course, it wasn't a large format sensor in those drones. So that's the question. I think their biggest obstacle is probably the mount they would be able to use, and they probably would have to go with an L mount. They have the mount from of course, that they're using on the Ronin 4D and the Inspire series, and they have interchangeable mounts, but the interchangeable mounts are, DJI says, not made by them. So the E-mount that is available for the Ronin 4D, we don't even know who makes it, but you can only buy it, I think, through DJI. But there's a few questions in that field. But if they decide to go into the camera market, I think the first camera we will probably see for them will be something. I don't think it will be a professional cinema camera. I think it will be a high-end mirrorless camera, a fully spec'd mirrorless camera that can probably do a lot of things that others can't do. Yeah. With built-in LiDAR.
Between prediction and hope, I hope the DJI will enter the mirrorless camera market as strong as they can with a mirrorless camera, because that's simply going to shake the market and do only good for it in terms of innovation. Because right now, of course, the market is being controlled by Japanese companies, and maybe to some extent, of course, Blackmagic Design and so on. But we need another force from the outside to shake things up. And DJI is the only one who is capable to do so. That's one thing. When it comes to Hasselblad or the integration, we're talking about, again, large sensor cameras. There is a room, of course, for DJI to come up with their own professional camera here for filmmakers. Only thing is, and that's a bit of an anecdote, I read an interview with the owner, and he said if he's not so sure that he can sell 1 million units, he's not even making it. So that's the question. If something like this, besides the prestige and kind of playing in the field of the big ones, when it comes to cinema market, if there's any other logical reason or economical reason for DJI to come up with a large format mirrorless camera that can do video. But yeah, I mean, we heard from some of our sources that, and again, we are not under NDA, so I feel free to talk about it, that there is an interest from DJI to produce such a camera. Let's see what the future will bring.
Yeah, we never know, but they definitely are very good at innovating its stuff, and let's hope they shake up our market. I'm not sure now, thinking about it, whether they will go in the mirrorless or pro cinema camera market, but of course, I mean, in terms of like selling more, would make more sense with a mirrorless camera. Yeah. Let's move on to Blackmagic Design.
Of course, Blackmagic. Yeah.
So Blackmagic Design, of course, had a big year of releases too. I don't think 25 will be as big for them in terms of like new, because now they need to deliver. They need to really try and get the Ursa 12K into as many high-end DPs as possible, because that's where they want to be. And also the 17K, we start seeing that in some high-end cinematographers' hands. We haven't touched it yet. We hope to get it soon for the lab test, of course. And also the Ursa Cine 17K immersive, like that version of the camera that has the binoculars in, like the dual camera fixed lens in front, specifically for the Apple Vision Pro. And that's also something that's probably going to gain some traction in 25. I think what they need to still work on in that field is, of course, integration with DaVinci Resolve, because that workflow, as we have seen, like we had an episode with Christoph Tilley from MXR Productions, who's doing a lot of VR immersive productions for the Vision Pro. But he was explaining the process and how complicated it is right now. I mean, they're, like mostly going with I think it's the R3 with that Canon immersive lens.
Yeah.
And having a workflow that is entirely Blackmagic based would, of course, it's a small niche still, and it might remain a small niche. We don't know, but it's something where I think some innovation is needed. And if Blackmagic can cater that whole pipeline, that would make a lot of sense. Now, in terms of like more mass market cameras, I think the Pixies 6K would be one camera line where the Grant Petty already announced that they see this as a platform. So like the Pocket line, where we've seen various iterations starting with Micro Four Thirds and 4K, and then Super 35, and then full frame, they all kind of the same body. We probably see the same with the Pixies. I hope that if there's one big criticism of the Pixies, is that it's using that same sensor that is really a bit dated now. So hopefully they will release a version of the Pixies at the end of this year. I don't think they will release anything around April, NAB time, anything major in the cinema camera field. They always announce a lot of stuff. They probably announced DaVinci Resolve 20 by around April, and then release the final version at September IBC time. But I can see them announcing a version of the Pixies around September time, which is probably, a better sensor, and hopefully dual base ISO, and hopefully finally better autofocus, because I think that is really become the Achilles heel of Blackmagic cameras, where we see so many people loving these cameras for the color science and so on. But similarly to RED, actually the biggest problem is that autofocus is not up to standard, especially because Blackmagic with these cameras and in general is catering a lot of the, like medium tier filmmakers that are really more reliant on autofocus if it works properly. And I hope they solve this, and I hope they, then you can have a proper Blackmagic camera with proper autofocus and low light capabilities in a Pixies body. That's what I want to see.
Yeah. I mean, the Pixies is now almost $3,000 US, which is really very competitive when it comes to price. Thing is, again, between predictions and hope, I really want Blackmagic to come back to its roots and produce a proper pocket camera. Something for small pockets. For small pockets, something that will bring back the joy of kind of running and gunning with their color science and recording modes. And of course, probably some things will have to be sacrificed, but we know for many that this kind of feeling and nostalgia still exists. People sometimes.
Do you have the feel? I know that's your hope, but I don't get this vibe from Grant Petty when we talk to him. It's more like he's really aiming. He's always aiming high, and he's also aiming at the high end. And we saw with the releases over the last few years, they're really going higher and higher and higher in terms of like what they can deliver. But I don't see them going the other way right now. Also because it's a much more crowded market.
Yeah, but that's the beauty, and that's why I really have a lot of respect for this person, because sometimes within this consistency, he can be not so predictable sometimes. It's like if you would talk to people and say a few years ago that Blackmagic Design will become a dominant player when it comes to 12 and 17K and they're aiming really high, you go, okay, yeah. But here now, when you achieve a certain, you proved that you can do it, and people are using those cameras, and you look back and say, where else can I innovate back maybe it's back to the core, and any business needs this kind of pyramid structure, which the 12K and the 17K are the pinnacle, and they will be sold, but they can't bring the bread and butter. The Pixies can, for example. Yeah. So you might need another camera to support this base and bring the cash flow to the company.
But don't forget, they're not predominantly a camera manufacturer, right? They earn most of their money with all the switchers and all that stuff.
But I'm talking about cameras because obviously Grant Petty has this passion to produce and bring to the market cameras, affordable cameras that people can use. I'm just saying, me personally, and that's not a prediction, that's a hope, that somebody at the company, and I guess it's Grant Petty himself, will just go like, it's time to go back to the drawing board and now do something that can really enter the pocket.
Well, if we talk about their pocket in terms of like making profit, I think what would do them well is really having that autofocus for many reasons. Because if you think about it, I've worked on many live productions which were entirely, ATEM based and with live switches and stuff. But at the end, if it's a high-end multicam productions, it's not Blackmagic cameras that are used there. It's other cameras that are using Blackmagic hardware to switch. And that's, I think, where he wants to go, right? The problem being that a lot of those live things are kind of reliant on autofocus. They would do much better if they had proper autofocus, face tracking autofocus. Now, if they solve that for any of their cameras, and it doesn't matter if it's their Pixis line or the high-end cameras, if they solve that, they could finally really be there. Like, you would see, I'm sure, systems provider pop up that are 100% relying on this stuff
ecosystem
and on their ecosystem. I mean, when the car shot, the car production we shot together with the 6, we tested everything, and there was this guy who showed up, like this rental company, who has a fixed setup with, because they shot something similar already. So we had a car with 6 Lumix cameras, ended up being Lumix cameras, and live switches in the back that were transmitting the image to another car. Now, this other guy, they already had the fixed setup. Like, we could have just rented this and just put it in the car with the micro cinema camera. But the problem was that the autofocus wasn't anywhere near where we needed it to be. So it was really bad, actually. And that was the reason why we couldn't use that system. Imagine but what worked really well is just everything ran into an ATEM. Everything was like a neat box, and it was transmitting. So everything was perfect except for the cameras. And I think this is true even for, like normal multicam productions where if you had a Blackmagic camera that has proper face tracking, autofocus, and all those things, they would really benefit from that. And that's really, doesn't matter if it's their lower end cameras or high end cameras. I think this is probably, I'm guessing, their ultimate dream, to kind of control the entire pipeline, because they're the only company, I can't think of any other, that is as dominant, that could be as dominant in the hardware, camera hardware, as they are in post-production and live production. And that's kind of the missing link. They haven't nailed that.
As long as you have the word cinema on your camera, it comes off justifying why not to have proper autofocus.
Well, that's been the case. That's true. That has been the case up until recently, but I think that's changing.
Exactly. So I think that's a matter to realize that having a camera that named cinema, it doesn't mean necessarily to reduce the performance of the autofocus. So,
because I think for ARRI it matters less, right? You like a production with an Alexa, like you always have a focus puller. You need a proper, even though it would be smart for them to at some point have a proper autofocus, it's never going to be a deciding factor for somebody to buy an ARRI camera. But for Blackmagic, it is a deciding factor, actually, as long as you use their other hardware. So I think they probably work hard on this anyway, but so far they're not close to what, especially Canon and Sony are.
Any manufacturer. Yeah. Okay, I think we kind of, hopefully we did not forget anyone. And if we did, please forgive us. It's like a lot of information.
Should we just do a brief thing about lenses in general? What do we want to see from lenses?
Sure. You still need a lens to cater the camera, no?
I mean, I think we're hopefully going to see more of those hybrid, like real hybrid lenses that are putting autofocus inside a cinema lens and not cinema features into a photo lens, because we talked about this before, where Canon said they released a bunch of new hybrid lenses, but essentially they're photo lenses because they don't have hard stops. Yeah. But we have seen the Sigma zoom lens, and we've seen the Blazar autofocus and the Siri autofocus. I mean, especially the Blazar and the Sigma are really professional, hard stop geared cinema lenses that in addition have also an autofocus functionality. And I can see there's a lot more to be done in that field. I think I said it before, I want to see one of those lenses where you can enable and disable the autofocus feature remotely, because that would allow focus pullers to simply use autofocus when they need it and disable it when they don't need it. That is
I still need to understand exactly what you mean. Not now, because you'd need like a clutch eventually to change between.
Yeah, but it can be a remote controlled clutch, right?
I don't know. I'm actually very curious. This is even more than cameras, where this market is heading to, because we see now almost everybody and their mothers are making lenses. So many manufacturers. It seems like the Chinese are slowly but surely moving forward with their own innovations. We could see this with this probe lens. Now there's the probe zoom lenses. Before it was just a fixed focal length, and now you can have these snorkel lenses with even zoom lenses.
Yeah.
So
now from DCO Film,
DCO Film, and the Laowa is probably coming up with something similar.
Yeah, they also announced that.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that this market is becoming extremely saturated, and then the question is, when those companies are competing on the heart of the customers, what are they competing at? I mean, is it going to be the price, which anyway goes down, or it's going to be features? Okay, how much more can you innovate here? Because you're always kind of tied to the physics, like the if it's a lens for full frame or APS-C, like there's a certain element. I mean, you're always the blanket is limited. I mean, you try to do something more and gives more on the higher on the lower end with wider focal length. It already will become a bigger lens, for example. Yeah, so there's a limit of on one hand on what you can do. On the other hand, many of those manufacturers are investing in some high-end equipment, like in a way that they can now produce in-house aspherical lenses. And when you produce aspherical lenses and put them into your lenses, that means you can do things. You can produce a much smaller, lighter lens. So before it was it's very expensive, basically, and only a limited number of companies had this. And now more and more Chinese companies are doing the lenses in-house with that type of advanced machinery. As you said, this autofocus in anamorphic is very welcomed. Features, I really hope that will also open the market for photographers to use anamorphic lenses and just have something a bit different. That also means that more people will buy the lenses, and then more investment will go into anamorphic, because right now, it doesn't matter how we twist it, anamorphic filming is still a niche.
But in general, I feel like we've had a couple of years where there was a crazy amount of new lenses. I think 23 was one of those years, 22, 23. It slowed down a little bit. I think we still have a lot of new lenses, but I don't think it's as many. That was the years when we still had all the Chinese companies suddenly release cinema primes. That is over, because I
don't think not only that it's not slowed down, I think many of the companies, or some of the Chinese companies, are even opening sub-companies in order to cater different markets. And you can see this with DJI Film, for example. We know DJI Film and we like what they do with lenses, and now they have a sub-company type. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Type.
I know. Type talk.
No.
Type talk.
Yeah, that's and those are really very small mini lenses they started it for photography, and now
the Chinese ones, sure, but I mean in general, if you look at the past years where we talked about Sigma before, Sigma released a line of cinema lenses, which we haven't heard about any updates in a while. We saw Canon with cinema primes. Like there might be the odd zoom that they update or something like that, but it's like that thing is covered, right? We don't see any. Of course, we had Zeiss release a new line. That's one of the few traditional lens manufacturers that released a new line of cinema lenses last year. But it's slowed down. I think of course,
what cinema line now specifically, or in general?
No, cinema line,
Okay.
like a cinema lens, like cinema primes for sure. But in general, I feel like they probably, especially in the lens field, with the strikes that are now long over, but still everything is still affected from a industry slowdown. I think they probably, they're just putting the brakes on for some of the releases. It's not as much new stuff as we used to have, but we see from less expensive brands, in a way, some innovation, Chinese brands, and also Sigma, like experimenting with autofocus on cinema lenses, whether it's anamorphic or not. That's welcome. But in general, I feel like, one thing we are still missing is basically we don't have enough RF lenses because Canon is not opening this for full frame versions. So we now have RF lenses from Sigma for APS-C, but of course we would love to see that for full frame as well. I don't think this will change this year, but it would be nice. I think it would do the Canon ecosystem very well in terms of I think a lot of hesitation around buying or investing into this very attractive new ecosystem of the new Canon cinema cameras is simply a much more limited choice when it comes to lenses, and limited meaning they're very good lenses, the ones that Canon releases for the RF mount, but they are pricey, and you very often don't have a budget option like alternative like you have on E mount, for example, or L mount, where for Sony very often you have the G Master and then you have the G lens, right? The less expensive one for full frame. You very often still don't have that on the RF mount. This is very slowly changing. And I think this is one of the roadblocks that Canon is facing, but they probably have a bigger margin on lenses. So they're like, it's weighing one or the other. Do we license that? I hope we will see other manufacturers, Sigma, Tamron, and all the Chinese manufacturers being able to release RF mount lenses.
I'm curious because we talk about cameras and the Nikon RED thing, because one of the major players in lenses is actually absent from the cinema market, and this is Nikon. Nikon does not produce any cine lenses right now.
No, they actually announced this zoom lens, this is servo zoom.
Yeah, but I'm talking a fixed focal length cine lens. Yeah. I really wonder, because now they have kind of the justification to do so with acquiring RED, if Nikon will come with their own line of cine lenses, and if yes, which market are which market they will target? Is it more the rental houses with a high end, and those usually have no reason to change lenses that they use and they like the look of it?
So that's a prediction that they will enter this?
My prediction, they will enter this. What I can't determine, because sometimes the ego will say, hey, let's go high end. But the reality will be much harder. It's like why famous DP will switch into something that just because of the name, I'm not so sure. So
I don't see this happening.
So I think they will have much better chance to compete on a mid-range.
That's true. I don't see this happening for high-end lenses. I think they probably look closely at the market and realize it's crowded. It's very crowded. And
the high-end?
High-end cinema lens.
Yeah,
market.
I don't know if it's crowded, but it's defined.
It's a rental market.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's
Yeah. So again, I'm really curious to see what optically can be done to enhance our experience right now when we are filming. Really wonder if all of those companies that are investing so much money in glass, maybe not next year, maybe not this year or next year, will suddenly face that some kind of some software design is actually taking shares from what they do, and you can, not that we love it as cinematographers, filmmakers, content creators, but maybe that will be the reality, that a lot of those cameras will be the same. What happened with gimbals, by the way, because the gimbal market was really crowded, and then camera manufacturers started to implement IBIS or stabilizing sensors in those cameras, and the gimbal market went a bit down.
I don't know if that's the case. That's what happened. What I'm observing is everybody's just using the DJI gimbals because they're just much better than any others.
But that will make eventually a progress to the point that maybe you don't need a gimbal. I'm just saying that I'm curious to see how the lens market will develop if there is some progress with computational depth of field and so on.
Yeah. Anything we want to touch on to round this off for lighting sector?
I know it's kind of there's a word in Yiddish. We call it boydem. You heard about boydem? This is the ethic. I want to bring something from the ethic. A few years ago, I think it was 2-3 years ago, Atomos was talking about making their own sensor. And that was supposed to be a full frame 8K up to 8K 60 global shutter sensor from Atomos. And the reason that I'm mentioning it here, because, and I don't want to go into details in terms of, when you look at Atomos, what they do now, but of course, that bringing to the market a sensor like this that hopefully they can sell to others can open up a lot of innovation. But the thing is, I think it was November 2022 when I last heard about, or we last heard or talked about this sensor. I have no clue where we stand now. That will be actually quite like to ask Jeremy what happened to this sensor. But talking about cameras and prediction, if that sensor comes, of course it can open up.
I don't see any of that happening. I mean, Atomos is not in an easy spot because they, of course, own this market of monitor recorders and were very dominant in that field. But of course, because of the advancement in camera technology, there's been less and less need to use external recorders. And also it's one of those things is, if you look at some of the latest recorders, like the Ninja 5, Ninja 5 Plus and so on, it can do anything, like you don't need a new recorder anymore because they're almost a victim of their own success. Because I just hooked it up yesterday to a camera, and of course it's able to record UHD 60. What more do you want, right? I mean, it's like there's a limit. And again, we have more and more cameras now that are recording ProRes internally, not necessarily RAW, but ProRes for sure. So there's a limited need for that. So, but in general, they branched out in some ways. Probably they were trying to diversify their portfolio, knowing that this market is kind of probably shrinking the monitor recorder market. We've also seen a light from Atomos, which was very surprising. But I don't see them, yes, if they are able to make their own sensor, amazing. If it can shake up the market, amazing. I just think it's going to be a very difficult bet for them in terms of investment.
Good. So I think that's it. We can wrap it up now.
Yeah. Anything about lights we want to say?
Ooh, wow.
Lights is, I mean, there's a lot that can happen here. It's also a very saturated market. I think that's fair to say. We've seen the advancement of RGB, WW is everywhere now, which used to be something a couple of years ago where basically every new light is an RGB light now. And I think we've seen it with the recent announcements from Nanlite and Aperture that now they're really looking at finally getting rid of those downsides of LED lights, which is still those spikes you have in certain areas. And they're slowly phasing that out. I mean, this is a very mature market. I think everything, even the high end, is now already on LED, except for the very, very strong lights. So now it's just about finally getting to a point to close that quality gap that is still existent between hot lights in general and LED lights in terms of like color accuracy. But this is a gradual thing. I don't think... We've seen, of course, in terms of lighting units, we've seen bigger and bigger and bigger LED lights, like more powerful ones, which was always the downside of LED. Now we have LED fixtures that can replace HMIs easily.
Yeah, but all the latest announcements are actually on the other spectrum, meaning it's smaller, much cheaper. They are constructed very well and everything.
Both actually. We see bigger lights for the high end, but we saw smaller lights, compact lights. And I think the good thing is now we are hardware-wise, it's almost like with cameras, it's very matured. So now we need to see more innovation other than smaller and bigger lights. We need to be better light, actually. It needs to be better light now, not just different sizes of the same thing.
Nino, do you predict that CineD will come up with their own line of products in the future? What do you say?
No comment.
Good.
Yeah, so... Good. Let's wrap it up here.
Yes.
And that's actually at the end of this year, we should look at our predictions and see what has happened. We will rewatch this episode and hold ourselves accountable of what has happened and what we have had no idea about.
And guys, please, if you have your own predictions or there are really certain things that you would like to see from certain manufacturers, please share your thoughts with us. We are always curious. We are reading everything, and it's a lot of fun. And you know what?
Leave a comment, or even better, write us an email at podcast@cined.com, or do both of those things. We'd love to see a discussion going below this podcast, or in the comment section on YouTube, or in our emails, and then we'll discuss it on one of the next episodes.
Great,
right.
Nino, thank you very much. Guys,
thanks everybody for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode of CineD Focus Check, and don't forget to leave us a good rating at Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast, or of course on YouTube. Please subscribe there. Give us a 5-star rating. We appreciate it. That will enable more people to experience our podcast that probably haven't seen it yet. So thanks for watching, and see you next week.
Thank you.